Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beneath the Silence, Healing the Wounds of Betrayal Trauma. Today, we're going to talk about institutionalized betrayal. And just before we get to that, I just want to thank all those people who are watching, who have, watched, shared, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or have left comments for me, some feedback that I really, really appreciate. So I want to thank you for doing that. I also want to thank any new listeners who have just joined for this episode on institutionalized betrayal. And again, just before we get to that, the last episode we did was, or that I did, was on religious betrayal. And then I had two interviews with specialists in the field of religious betrayal. The first one was religious betrayal, and the other is religious betrayal and cults, but specifically to cults, um, under the category of religion, and sometimes not. And those were really good interviews. So I wanted to just give a shout out to both Liz and Bethany again. And please, if you haven't already, listen to or watch those interviews. They were very, very productive. Um, there will be an interview after this podcast. There will be an interview in early January with a lawyer, and I'll follow up about institutionalized betrayal and what that means from the legal standpoint, and from a lawyer who obviously works in the field, and we'll go from there. So just like I've always said with these podcasts, they're real, raw, authentic, vulnerable. I don't edit, so I'm going to mess up. I'm going to, that's part of being human. And I hope the discussion and the information I share feel like we're sitting across the kitchen table having a cup of tea. And I hope that the interviews that I have done have that's what it felt like to you as well. All right, so as we dive into, institutional betrayal trauma, I'll start off with this. So what happens when the very system designed to protect your rights, or deliver justice, betrays you instead? So today I'm talking about institutionalized betrayal trauma, the wounds left behind when organizations, governments, schools, or workplaces protect the wrong people and silence those who have been harmed. So, what is betrayal trauma or institutionalized betrayal trauma? It can happen in any kind of organization, from, a small employer, small business, to large, governments. And it can happen in any of those organizations. So whether it's religious, government, corporate, medical, educational, and it often overlaps with other forms of betrayal trauma. So I'll start this with a definition, of course, by Dr. Jennifer Fried, and I'm quoting her definition from 2021. And it reads as this: so institutionalized betrayal refers to wrongdoings perpetuated by an institution upon individuals dependent on that institution, such as students or employees, including failure to prevent or respond supportively to wrongdoings by the individuals. Example, sexual assault, committed within the context of the institution. I'm going to give you an example. I believe it was 2021. Please don't quote me on that because I didn't look that up ahead of time. But I believe it is around 2021. There was approximately 30 young women that went to a university in Southern Ontario. And at that university, it was, the first week of school. So, all the activities that go on when they first, first week of September, end of August, first week of September, when all of the activities happen before classes start. So it was for first year students, and it went off very well. The students ended up planning, or there were some students that planned some events in the evening, especially the Friday evening, a party for all the first year students. Now, sometimes, or there may have been second or third year students that went, but this was mainly for first year students. Okay. What happened to these 30 plus young women were that they were sexually assaulted and raped. They often were drugged and so on. Now, this wasn't a university sanctioned event. Okay, it was off campus. However, it's betrayal trauma because there was an assumed safety because all the first year students were all alike. We've just left home for the first time. We're out on our own. We're at the same university. You must be smart enough that you got into this university. And so we're all alike. You're like me. I'm like you. And they went to a party. And unfortunately, there was a number of young men, I'm going to call them perpetrators because that's exactly what they were, who already had planned to drug, sexually assault, and rape these young women. Now, when there was some of the young women went to the university to talk to faculty, like, their professor, first day of class, or staff members, there was no policies, procedures, or practices in place at this university and how to deal with the situation, how to help these young women. And that's where institutionalized betrayal came in. Even though it wasn't a university sanctioned event where the sexual assault and rape happened, the university had nothing in place to support and guide their students. Institutional betrayal. So I'm going to give you more examples. Okay. So the wrongdoings or offenses tend to be maintained by an institution upon people who are dependent on that institution. There is an implicit trust that one is safe and will be protected at school, at work, or within any public or private organization, including our government, such as the court system. However, most often this is not the case. Although there are legal and ethical responsibilities adherent to the institutions, many do not have policies, procedures, and practices. So policies are what's written, procedures is what you do, and the practices is how you go about doing it. Do not have policies, procedures, or practices in place that support or safeguard the individuals dependent on the institution. This can include, but is not limited to, lack of resources and knowledge to avoid or act compassionately to wrongdoings and or crimes. For example, sexual assaults, because that's a big one, that are committed within the context of the institution. Betrayal has many facets, as it can appear as conspicuous policies to behaviors such as discriminatory statutes to the atrocities of genocide. So this occurs also when institutions cause harm to those dependent on them for safety, well-being, or justice. It includes harm by commission, so direct action, and omission, failure to act or protect. Marginalized populations are much more likely to experience institutionalized betrayal trauma. The lack of appropriate policies, and more importantly, procedures and practices, the steps needed to follow and enforce a policy are detriments to disclosure for those who experience sexual or other harassment. Okay. When institutional betrayal is experienced, the level of safety is reduced, and as is the attachment and, and commitment to that institution. Okay. So I already gave you an example of one type of institutional betrayal. And so this is universities mishandling sexual assault reports, such as lack of policies, procedures, and practices in place, hospitals covering up for medical errors, negative medical experiences that result in people refraining from seeking medical assistance. In Canada, our government not following through and completing all calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015. And before that, it was called the Report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People of 1996. In fact, if I might add to that, um, ooh, where do we tend to look here? Okay. It's if we look at our government in Canada for action and are met with inaction, it's institutional betrayal. Remember this, the report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples originated in 1996, and only 2 of the 94 calls to action were completed 10 years later. Excuse me. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, began in 2015, and the federal government has now completed 28 calls to action as of July 1st, 2024. I will have the citation for this where you can look this up. So 28 of 94 calls to action that began in 1996, and by 2024, so 28 years later, only 28 of those calls to action were addressed. This is institutionalized betrayal trauma. In the United States, what's happening now? The president, and I hate to even call him that, and government for not following the rule of law and the Constitution while putting American lives at risk, i.e., the ICE raids, cancellation of food programs, etc. There has been so much deceit and secrecy that has been without transparency. That is institutionalized betrayal. It is also individual betrayal from your direct member of Congress or Senate that is not returning your calls or answering your letters or addressing the lack of following the rule of law and the Constitution. It is institutionalized betrayal trauma, individual betrayal and institutionalized betrayal. Now, you put in those marginalized communities that are being scooped up, especially by ICE raids, and placed in these quotes unquote detention centers. Further institutionalized betrayal. So I'm going to read this aspect that I've already written down here. It's how governments hide their own betrayals. And this not just Canada, where I'm from, but other countries as well. Okay. So how many times has the government promised restitution or has done something that has harmed a certain population in our country or in any country, and they hide what they have done or ignore the ethics behind it. How many politicians do we vote for because of their platform, yet once elected, it's as if that platform never existed? That is institutionalized betrayal. Now think slavery or what our indigenous populations have experienced, colonization and genocide. How has our government and systems perpetuated institutionalized betrayal trauma to these oppressed populations? Through inequity, inequality of programs, services, wages, and stealing of land through deceit, and the list goes on and on and on. Naming what land we stand on is currently, it's a start. Please don't stop doing that. It's a start, but then what? What actions do we do? We all can have a voice and demand action from our governments, from our local representatives, whether that in Canada, provincial and federal representatives, or if you're in the States, your state senate, your state government, governor, demand, demand action. Okay. It also, institutional betrayal is police minimizing intimate partner violent claims or sexual assaults, including victim or survivor, I like to say survivor blaming, workplaces retaliating against whistleblowers, child protection agencies failing to intervene, religious organizations who do not believe the survivors or who move, the religious leader from one church, synagogue, or mosque to another, destroying documents that report betrayal trauma. Family court and judges who continue to allow the perpetrator to make motions when the law states that all documents, including financial records, must be submitted first. Judges who hire consultants for trauma cases and the consultants are not certified in trauma. Judges in any court who are not trauma informed, and I would say actually lawyers too, who are not trauma informed and do not take trauma and the responses of trauma into consideration, including when children are involved. Can you tell I'm very passionate about this? When police, lawyers, and judges do not know what trauma and the psychology behind trauma mean, they're more apt to not trust the victims or survivors. Holding a survivor responsible, especially when or if they forget some or all of the traumatic experience. There was a case in Canada, and when I talked to this lawyer in January, when I interview, this would be brought up, and it was a Hockey Canada case where there was five perpetrators and one survivor. And I would argue that the judge completed institutional betrayal trauma in the way she completely denigrated the survivor, called her a liar. And we'll talk more about that when I interview the lawyer. Courts that lack the understanding of consent. That's going to be part of the interview process. So, why is this so damaging? Well, institutions often hold power, authority, and legitimacy in society. The betrayal undermines not only trust in the institution, but in societal systems as a whole. Survivors may feel powerless to challenge large, well resourced entities when they lack funds to fight. Jennifer Fried, betrayal blindness. So, how does that apply to institutions? Well, this is leaders or members who may minimize or ignore harm to protect the organization's image. It's bystander blindness. Or with knowledge, it's ignoring what's happened to the survivor. It's cognitive dissonance. Easy to deny harm than to accept the institution failed in its duty. So, signs and impacts of institutional betrayal is erosion of trust in authority figures and systems. There's increased fear, hypervigilance, or cynicism towards new institutions or any other institutions. Chronic stress from prolonged battles for justice. I'm going to say that chronic stress, I mentioned in an earlier podcast about me having secondary adrenal insufficiency. And I have two doctors, including my endocrinologist, who said the chronic stress from when I experienced my own betrayal trauma and then going through the court system, I call it the injustice system, is what depleted and damaged my pituitary and adrenal glands. Then I no longer make ACTH and a hormone needed in the production of cortisol, and my body does not make cortisol. And it's life-threatening. So I'm going to ask the following questions. And I want you to ask these questions of yourself if you think you've experienced institutionalized betrayal, because many of us have. Or if you're in the helping field, you can ask these questions of your client or clients. Did the client or yourself rely on an institution and have an inherent belief of safety and trust within that institution? If the answer is yes, it's institutionalized betrayal. Second question, was there a power imbalance within the institution, often an authority figure? So think potentially professors or somebody who can say, okay, you're out of here. You're not going to go to this school anymore. Or a judge, a lawyer. There's certain power imbalances. Okay. Government officials. The answer is yes. There's institutional betrayal. Did the institution have policies and practices in place that supported the client sufficiently, or was the client's experience with the institution further traumatizing? If the first part of this question was no, there's institutionalized betrayal. If the second part of the question was the client's experience with the institution further traumatizing, the answer is yes, there's institutionalized betrayal. And the last question, did the institution rectify their actions, and evoke change for the better? If the answer is no, there is institutional betrayal that is still ongoing. Jennifer Fried developed, it's called the Principles of Institutional Courage, and it's for those institutions. And if there are anyone who works in any institution, including a small employer, please, 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 suggest to your organization, or if you have a business, or are a supervisor in an institution, please look up Jennifer Fried, Institutional Courage, and you will find all kinds of documents that you will be at liberty of sharing and making your own. Okay. So what are the barriers to reporting or seeking justice? This is fear of retaliation or blacklisting, and that's especially of whistleblowers. It is when organizations create barriers for survivors to report their experiences and pursue justice. And this is from Crystal, 2024. And I'm going to just read what Crystal says here. Institutional betrayal trauma is exacerbated when organizations create barriers for survivors to report their experiences and pursue justice. This disclosure happens more often between peers, if it happens at all. But the stigmas and the repercussions related to disclosure often stop people from sharing their experiences, especially in institutions such as the military, but in any institution, okay? Many times, especially men in the military, but women as well, are discouraged from reporting experiences of military sexual trauma. In other institutions, such as high schools, universities, religious groups, and in healthcare, a distinct power imbalance and lack of trust in the institutional process stop people from making reports. One of those reasons is the belief that nothing will change. What good will it do? Or that they're not going to believe me. And also, when the bureaucracy is complex, it's designed to wear down the survivors. So how do we heal? It's validating your own experience, even if the institution denies it. You are not crazy. What you have experienced is real. Validate you. Seeking support from advocacy groups or survivor networks, if at all possible. Seek out trauma-informed legal and mental health support. The lawyer that I will be interviewing works for a personal injury firm, and she is trauma-informed, and her work is specifically around sexual assault, rape, whether that is from organizations, religious organizations, or a family member, or whatever the case may be. Okay. It's also recognizing that the system's failure is not a reflection of your worth or your credibility. Their failure is theirs. It is not yours. I'm going to give you an example. I'll try to keep this short, of my own court. That my ex would not settle out of court, so we had to go to court. My ex brought forth a bad faith motion that was deemed in bad faith, accusing his first attorney of injustices that were never done. And any email that he wrote to her and the responding back was how wonderful that she was. But then started this motion, got another attorney, and then started this motion that he was deceived, et cetera, a number of things. It ended up costing me tens of thousands of dollars in order just to protect myself from this frivolous motion. It was deemed that he was not supposed to be allowed to even put in a motion because he didn't even have all of his documents in. No, his financial records were not all done, were not all in. He had lied on financial records. I don't even know if he, to this day, realizes that he submitted a copy of a front of a bank statement that was from a bank account that he didn't report on. And the bank account he did report, he didn't supply the document for that bank account. So we know that there was multiple bank accounts, but only one was written about, but another one was submitted. I laugh now, not at the time. There was all kinds of things. There was fraud that happened, and he still was able to put in another bad faith motion. And it took almost 4 years of going through back and forth. Actually, yeah, almost 4 years of going through back and forth, February 2018 to December of 2021. Until he finally settled. But he finally settled because the judge had said there's no more chances. You get your financial stuff, you get all those records in within the month, or that's it. And what we ended up settling for was what I had asked for at the very beginning. And yet the court allowed it to continue, and it ended up costing me about $200,000. Yeah. I ended up completely, utterly, financially destitute, broke. But I couldn't stop because I wouldn't have anything then to be able to pay my lawyer. Institutionalized betrayal. I call it the injustice system. So what can you take away from today? Is institutionalized betrayal trauma occurs when systems fail those that are meant to protect, causing deep psychological and societal wounds. Survivors often face unique barriers in confronting powerful organizations. And the third is healing requires validation, advocacy, and the reclaiming of personal agency outside the institution's control. Our next episode is going to be on betrayal trauma and the layered effect, and it's when betrayals overlap, because wherever you have cultural betrayal, you'll have an individual betrayal. Wherever you have family betrayal, you have an individual betrayal. Institutional betrayal, individual betrayal. But you may have an overlapping of all of these. So that's going to be the next episode that we have. And again, I want to thank you for joining me today from Beneath the Silence, healing the wounds of betrayal trauma. And remember, please, that healing is possible, even from the deepest, most painful wounds. For more resources and information about my betrayal trauma course, it's a 12-hour course, please go to my website, sandrajoy.ca. Podcasts are on the website as well. And if you can, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share, because it helps others who you may not know are struggling. And if you can share in your social media, I would really appreciate that. You may not know how much you're helping someone else by giving them this information, so they don't they realize that they're not crazy. And until next time, please take gentle care of yourself, and remember, I see you, I hear you, and I believe you. Until we meet again.